Don't be alarmed. The woman who just screamed is perfectly quiet now.
Boris Karloff scared the hell out of me.
You're afraid of me, aren't you?
He's got this wonderful kind of voice that takes you in.
I leave my secret with you. It's all there.
He was underrated as an actor because his fame was so enormous.
Boris Karloff, the one, the only, king of monsters.
My father really was a gentle soul. Yeah, I don't think he scared anybody. Not in real life, he never did.
For most of the 20th century, the name of Boris Karloff was synonymous with terror. But the actor most famous for playing the Frankenstein monster was in fact a well-educated Englishman. He was born William Henry Pratt in Camberwell, South London, on November the 23rd, 1887. Billy was the youngest of 9 children, born to Eliza Pratt and her husband John, a member of the diplomatic service.
Most of his family were all very, very high in the British government. They were all government servants. And his father had been working as some member of the government in India, which one assumes is where he met his mother. He was very, very dark, and his family was East Indian on his mother's side. And he always had this very heavy color. And in a British school, you know, with his coloring, friends used to say, you know, you must spend an awful lot of time in the sun, and how do you get that tan? And Boris always said, well, plenty of gin and a tight collar, and that's the way I got it.
When John Pratt abandoned his family to live in France, 5-year-old Billy was left in the care of his mother and older siblings. But Eliza's death just 2 years later dealt the young boy an emotional blow from which he never recovered.
I don't think he had a warm, cuddly childhood or family life. I think that his older brothers would come home and would knock him about a bit and go off again. And I don't think he had fond memories, and he never talked about it.
After playing the Demon King in a parish production of Cinderella, 9-year-old Billy became fascinated by the theatre. But it was Gerald de Moy's flamboyant interpretation of Captain Hook in a London stage production of Peter Pan some years later that really got the young boy hooked on acting.
All he wanted to do was to become an actor, and he did whatever it took to pursue that lifelong dream.
Despite strong pressure to enter the diplomatic service, Billy Pratt dropped out of London University, where he was a student. At age 21, he took his modest inheritance and sailed on the Empress of Britain to seek a new life, far from his English roots. Arriving in Montreal in Canada on May the 17th, 1909, the aspiring actor travelled west, working as a farmhand and manual labourer. Within a year, he had reached British Columbia, where he exaggerated his acting experience and was taken on by the Jean Russell Players, a repertory company. It was here for the first time that William Henry Pratt adopted the stage name Boris Karloff. The surname, he said, came from a Russian name on his mother's side, and Boris from out of thin air.
My father never took Boris Karloff legally. It was an AKA. All his legal papers were signed William Henry Pratt, AKA Boris Karloff. His contracts were signed Boris Karloff. I don't know if that makes him legal or illegal.
But Boris's budding career was cut short in Regina, Saskatchewan. In the summer of 1912, a huge tornado destroyed the town, killing 41 people and leaving the company's theatre and its scenery in ruins. Karloff returned to menial jobs until another repertory company, the Harry St. Clair Players, hired him for 3 seasons. It's during this period that Boris is thought to have married a Canadian actress called Olive de Wilton, but no record of this survives. After moving to the United States in 1913, he left the Sinclair Players, and following a theatrical stint in Chicago, he settled in Los Angeles, home of the rapidly expanding movie industry. His first confirmed acting job was as an extra in a Douglas Fairbanks film, His Majesty the American. More screen work followed, including a role as a Huron Indian in Last of the Mohicans. But life wasn't easy for a Hollywood actor, even one as versatile as Boris Karloff.
He was absolutely poverty-stricken and hungry most of the time, but he had what he always referred to as the fire in his belly for the craft. He just had it. And he said his favorite thing was canned mulligatawny soup, because he would make one meal out of the soup part and another meal out of the vegetables that were in it. It was that bad. He was starving most of the time.
It was during this period that the young Karloff got married and divorced 2 more times. In July 1920 to a musician named Montana Lorenea Williams, and again in February 1924 to Helene Vivian Soule, a Hollywood actress and dancer.
Those were days when he was learning his trade. He was as often, I think, driving a truck, loading a truck, or unloading a freight car as much as he was making films in those days to make ends meet.
By now, Boris was working steadily, mostly in bit parts and character roles, and usually as a villain. With his brooding eyes and dark colouring, he played everything from Arab sheikhs and gangsters to a Moroccan bartender. He's seen here in a recently discovered silent film entitled Sharp Shooters.
He could be very villainous. He could be debonair. He could be handsome. He could be ugly. He could do a lot of things with very little makeup, and so he was a very versatile actor.
Karloff's most important role to date was as the macabre hypnotist in The Bells, opposite Lionel Barrymore, a performance modelled on the German expressionist horror classic, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. In 1928, the advent of sound threatened to expose another of Karloff's unusual characteristics.
Art thou prepared for the execution?
Somebody said, what about his lisp?
Summon the executioner.
But he could do most anything with his voice. Be very sinister, but also be very soothing, very pleasant, very cultured.
In 1930, Boris was married again, this time to a woman called Dorothy Stein.
She was a librarian, and he had just begun to get some better parts when they married, but he was an unknown.
For a character actor like Boris Karloff, there was perhaps no greater hero than Lon Chaney. His unique gift for creating grotesque makeups and horrifying characters made him one of the screen's first superstars. But while preparing for the role of Dracula in Universal Pictures' film version of the successful stage play, Chaney was stricken with throat cancer and died in 1930. Desperate to find a successor for their Man of 1,000 Faces, Universal decided to gamble on the Hungarian actor who had created the part on Broadway, Bela Lugosi.
I am Dracula.
Dracula, the original terrifying story of a man who lived after death.
The tremendous success of the film made the dashing actor an international star. Now billed as the new Lon Chaney, Lugosi was to star in a film adaptation of another Gothic masterpiece, Frankenstein.
He thought that a script which had virtually no dialogue at all was not something he wanted to do. And he also realized that the makeup was so heavy that his abilities as an actor wouldn't be used the way that he thought they should, and he turned down the role.
With Lugosi out of the running, the task of casting the monster was given to a new director, the brilliant and eccentric James Whale. In his search for an actor who could convincingly play the part of a creature stitched together from the bodies of dead convicts, Whale spotted the 43-year-old actor who was getting noticed in Howard Hawks' prison drama, The Criminal Code.
Howard Hawks picked Karloff to play the same part he'd done on the stage. He was so impressed with him. And the character of Galloway, you can see the Frankenstein monster for the first time.
During a chance meeting with Boris at Universal Studios, Whale is rumoured to have said, "Your face, Mr. Karloff, has interesting possibilities." Karloff accepted the role of the monster in Frankenstein. Little did the 43-year-old actor realise the impact the film would have on his life and on the audience.
When Frankenstein was first released, it was as gigantic an onslaught as like E.T. Nothing had ever been seen like it.
Throw the switches.
The scene in which the monster is brought to life remains one of the most unforgettable moments in movie history.
When we first see this scarred hand and Colin Clive saying it's moving.
It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
Well, I thought it was just the greatest picturization of fantasy and horror that I had ever seen. Karloff brought a real pathos to it. There's the sequence which unfortunately was excised from the film for many, many years, where the monster's down by the lake with the little girl.
See how mine floats?
She shows him a little game that she can take a daisy and throw it in the lake and it floats, and he likes that. But eventually they run out of daisies and he's, more, this is fun. And so you sort of see a gleam in his eye. Well, wait a minute, daisies float, I guess little girls float.
No, you're hurting me! No!
Boris Karloff himself had kind of a negative reaction to that scene. He felt that it made him appear rather monstrous, but I don't see any evil intent at all. He doesn't do it out of malice, evil, anything of that nature, just out of naivete.
I became aware of the humanity of somebody who was deformed or a creature. And I think probably that was the most moving thing about Frankenstein.
Although he gave a brilliant performance as the monster, Karloff also benefited from amazing character makeup, designed by the legendary makeup artist Jack Pierce.
Jack Pierce certainly conceived it, but Karloff added to it. He added the eyelids that gave the creature a more dead look. He took out a part of his teeth to give it an indenture into his cheek, giving an added dimension to that facial look of the monster.
Multiple layers of cheesecloth, putty, and toxic industrial chemicals were used to create the monster's distinctive look. It was a painstaking process that took over 4 hours and had to be recreated every day.
Boris would have to start the makeup at 4 in the morning, and Boris never had any breakfast except something horrible to me, which was orange juice with 2 raw eggs thrown into it. And the combination of a Karloff makeup and raw eggs and orange juice was not attractive.
The price Karloff paid to bring his character to life was heavy. Having to work wearing a padded costume and boots, which together weighed 95 pounds, proved to be seriously detrimental to his chronic back condition, which soon resulted in a stay in hospital for spinal treatment. Although represented in Frankenstein's opening titles by an ambiguous question mark, Boris Karloff had become a superstar. The character actor who had spent a quarter of a century in obscurity was now so famous that within a year he would be billed using his last name alone, an honour previously reserved for screen immortals like Valentino.